Hi everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use Grep and Cut and showing you by example how do we look at the SSH logs, or more accurately the auth.log file inside your /var/log folder to try and identify brute force attack that might be targeting your SSH server online. Okay, so before we start, let us start off with some of the basic grep or grep options available. So the simplest way to use grep is to just issue the command, right, and then specify the patterns or the keywords that you want to look for. In this example, users in the file or the text file that you want to look for the particular words in. Right, so when we do this, grep user from, I've made a copy of my auth.log file, right? You can see that it shows or capture all the lines that has the word user, right? Or the pattern user. Now it can be quite hard to see, right? When everything is in the same color, what you can do is to add the option color, right? Or equal always, right? And what it does, it will now show you the keywords in a different color. So it's easier to capture. Now what you notice is that when I use just grep user, we also pull out the line with our user, right? So without specifying any options, it will look for a pattern that appears in the line or patterns that is part of a word, right? So if you do not want that, you can always put in the option -w, right, for a single word. What it will do now is that it will look for only words that have an exact match. Okay, so you can see that our user is not being highlighted now. So what it means that you will only look for the lines that match the words exactly, right? So we search for user, we use the option -w to search for the user. So only user is being selected and highlighted. Okay, so these are common options available, right, for you to start looking for text in your text file. Now the next option we're going to do is to count, right, the number of logs, the number of lines in the logs itself. So options -c allows you to count the number of lines in the logs. So we're going to count the number of lines that has user in the logs itself. So if you do -c, it doesn't show you the results, but it gives you the count of the number of lines, right? So there are 8,304 lines in the logs that contain user. Now, how do we know what exactly how many lines do we have in the file? So we can always do a -c followed by a blank pattern, right? So what it does, it will count every line in the file itself. So we have 15,221 lines. So out of that, 8,304 lines contains the word user. Okay, so this is very good and easy for you to start analyzing logs and also to look for errors or patterns or variables in a code, right? In a file that has your lines of codes, right? Okay, so what I've shown you is the basic. Now, for grep or for Linux, most of the patterns or words are case sensitive, right? So by not without specifying any options by default, right, the grep function or command will look for, in our case of -w user, it will look for exact match of the words and the exact match for the case, right? Whether it's uppercase or lowercase. Now, how do we test that, right? So if we look at minus user, right, and we search for it, you can see that you cannot see any lines in the logs because there are no lines in the log that contains the capital U. Now, to show you that by default is case sensitive, right? If we look at disconnected, we can see that there is disconnected with a capital D, right? So if we do minus W disconnected, you will see that only words with the letter, capital letter D, right, for disconnected get shown. Now, if we change this to lowercase d, we will only see lines with the lowercase d. Now, in a lot of times, we might not be concerned about case sensitivity. So the option to do that is to put in the option minus I, right? Minus I stands for ignore case, right? Or case insensitive, right? So if we do minus I now, you will see both the disconnected with capital D, right? And then some point of time, you will you will see, you know, logs with lowercase d in there as well. Okay, so minus I is an option that is useful if you are not concerned about the caps in the word itself. Next, what we look at is a common option, which is n, right, to denote the number in the for the line itself, right? So for logs, it might not be that useful unless you are drilling into very specific details. But for coding, right, then the lines can be useful because you can then, after doing the search, go directly to the line and make your changes, right? So the minus n option will give you the lines that has the keywords that you are searching for. So you can see line 15217, and then you can see that we have ignore line 18, 19, 20, right? Because they don't contain the word disconnected. Okay, so with that, it's really useful to start looking for patterns and the lines that is contained in the text file itself. Now, in a lot of time, you might also want to look at, after identifying the logs, to look at the code before the lines and after the lines, right? So I'm going to show you this example. On line 15097, as we can see, we are not seeing the two lines, uh, 96 and 95 above, and we're not seeing quite a fair bit of lines below, right? So in a little bit more detailed analysis for logs, right, and for coding, you might want to only look at the lines before and after the particular lines that you're interested in, right? So to do that, we can do the following, right? Let's just put the pattern into our search first, right? So we're going to search for disconnected from invalid user pi, right? And the options to do that is minus B, right? For before, we can look for two lines before the line disconnected from invalid user pi, right? So when we do that, you can see that we now see line number 96 on N95, right? 15095 and 15096. So from there, we can see that, you know, there was a failed password for invalid user, So not only the password is wrong, we don't even have the user in our database or in our password or in our user group, right, from the source IP address here. And therefore, it was disconnected. And the good thing is all these are pre-authentication. That means that the server did not get compromised. Okay, now that's before. Now to look for lines after, we can do -a after, and we can look at 2 lines after. And then when we look at this, we can see that these two are new attacks or new lines, right? So it has no relevance because the source IP address is different, right? So this is before and after. Now, if you want to look for, like in this case, instead of looking at words 2 lines before and 2 lines after, I want to look at the lines, right, before and after, and I want to look at uh, 2 of those before and after. So what we can do is -c context content. So we can, when you do a -c, it will show you 2 lines before and 2 lines after, right? So we can see 1095, 1096, 1097, 98, 99, right? So from this analysis, we can see that, the failed authentication, which is relevant to us, and the 2 lines below are not relevant to this particular logs itself. Okay, so with this, it gives you a very basic and easy start to understanding and analyzing your logs. Okay, now in a lot of time to analyze brute force, what we're trying to look at is really the source that the attack is coming from, and then the username that the attackers is using. So in a lot of brute force, they run a dictionary attack. So, sometimes, right, by doing this analysis, it also allow us to see if in our configuration, right, especially if you are the blue team, right, whether you have usernames, right, that are being used in brute force attack, right? So security is always, defense in layer. So you might want to change the username or make the password uh, a lot harder to crack, or you might just want to use public key but not have the same username that the brute force attackers is using. Okay, so now that you learned the basic, what are some of the keywords that you can use with Grep to try and get an understanding or quick understanding of the logs, and as well as take out useful data like username and IP address so that you can reuse them in your defense, putting it into Python for scriptings. There are a lot of things you can do with that information, right? So one of the way to look at or to get a cleaner look of the log file itself is to look for user, right? So minus win, the exact word, case insensitive, the line of the word user, right? So we want to see what are the logs that are related to the user. So you can see that there are various kind of logs. There are PAM module after the SSH connection, right? The authentication is hand off to the PAN module. We see authentication failure. We see remote host. We see user, right? So that is one area that you can try and filter the logs. Or we can also look at, more importantly, what we want to look at is the failed password, right? So you can, do a quick scroll of the screen, and then you can see either you can use authentication failure, or let's just try and do this, right? We'll capture user. Let's look at failure, right? So we can see that, it's failure. Let's look at failed. Okay, so this is what I was trying to look for, right? Failed password, right? So this is, as you can see, right, using protocol SSH2, right, the IP address and failed password from the user root. Okay, so this will probably be a good source of logs for us to try and pull out the user as well as the source IP address. Okay, so once we do that, we can use the grep function, right? I'm showing you, I'll show you how to use toGrep in a line to achieve what we want to do, right? In terms of cutting out the user as well as the failed password, right? So what we can do now is to try and look for, so we can do an immediate one with a failed password, or what we can do is to do a cat, right, to read and output the file to the terminal, right, in this case. So we're going to cat of original.log, and then we're going to pipe the output into a filter with grep, and then look for user. Okay, we can see that all the users. So we can then also then look for pipe, and then look for grep. Now instead of the full words, we might just want to look for case insensitivity, and then followed by the keyword fail. Okay, and let's see what we get. Right, we get failed password, invalid user. So we get the PEMP and then the SSH log, right? So what we're going to do is, and it seems that there are quite a fair bit of duplicate with the PEM side of things. So I think we are safer with just capturing the failed password for now. Okay, so once we do that, right, you can see that we have, and we do have failed. Okay, we can see that we have failed password for invalid user, right? So we're going to use this filter and try and pull out just the username and the IP address, right? So once we have done our filter, right, or the grep command to get the line of codes we want, then we can always do a -c count, right? So we can see that we have string the number of lines from 15,000 down to 445. Okay, so what we're going to do is now to use the command cut, right, to try and pull out the data, right, by ignoring all the timestamps and the rest of the words or the data in the line itself. So we're going to pull out the user. So we can use the option cut, right? So cut allow you to cut out the specific words you want from the text or the logs itself, right? So in this case, we want to get user. So first we need to identify the delimiter, right? So what is the common delimiter inside this line, right? So in this case, we can see space is probably the common delimiter. So there's 2 space here, right? And then the info that we want to cut before there's a space, after there's a space, right? The user, and then for the IP address, before that there's a space, after that there's a space. So it seems like the delimiter space is a good delimiter. So we can specify the option -d for delimiter and use space as the delimiter or the delimiter to filter out the words. Now, once we specify the delimiter, we need to look at the field that we want to cut out, right? So before this 2 space, this is field number 1, field 2, field 3, field 4, field 5, field 6, field 7, field 8, field 9, field 10, field 11, right? So technically, we can specify minus few 11, and let's see what we get, right? And you realize that, hey, yes, we are getting few 11, which is user, right? But what we actually want is the few 12, which is the actual username. So we can do this, few 12, and let's see. Yes, and we have gotten our username. So what we can do now is to pipe this to a file called user.text. And what it does is that I have put the data into a file so that I can use it later. So if I now cat user.text, you can see that I'm only getting the username, right? So of course we can pipe and grep minus C 445. So it's correct, right? We have 445 lines of logs. We have 445 username being captured. Now we have cut the username. Now we're going to do the same for the IP address, right? So we have few 12 for the username. The IP address is 1314, right? So similarly, we're going to do minus few 14. And yes, so we are getting the IP address. Let's just do a count. Oops. Right, you can count here. Oops. Minus C. Okay, and we can see 445. So that's correct. So we're gonna take out the count and then pipe it to IP address dot text, right? So we can do a cat IP address. I mean, there are a lot of other easier command that can achieve count like sort, unique, etc. But since we're on a grep tutorial, we'll do grep, right? Minus C. Okay, 445 is correct. So if we cat this up out, we should see all the IP address there. Okay, great. Now, what if we want to make sure that we have both the user and IP address together, right? For the in-depth analysis or for visualization, if you've gone through my Elastic Cloud tutorial, you will see that sometimes you want to make correlation between the IP address and the username. So for that case, you can also use cut, right, without going in using other application or more advanced scripting language like Python, awk, or SED, right? You can actually look for field 12, comma, and field 14. So what it does is that using the delimiter, right, space, you will look for field number 12, which is the username, and field 14, which is the password. So when we do that, you can see that we have actually cut both the username and the IP address from the log file. And we might use this for more advanced, filtering or use that piece of information into our future tutorial. So what we do now is to pipe it into username underscore IP dot text. Okay, so now if we do a cat username IP.text, you can see we have that. Now if we do a count, we can see that it is 445 lines, right? So that's all, right, for this tutorial to give you a quick way to analyze the log using grep and cut, and then cutting out the data so that you can use it for other purposes. So in my next tutorial, I will show you how do I use the IP address that we have cut out from the logs and using GeoIP to map out the country, right, that the attack is coming from. So stay tuned for that and take care and stay safe.